There's a problem with a lot of photography advice. See, when you hear about ways to make your photos better, it sometimes feels like you've been given the recipe to someone else's favorite meal. It doesn't match your style, it's generic, and it makes your photos look like everyone else's. I'm sure you've seen those videos on TikTok or whatever where they're like, try this, and then it's just crouching down to get a reflection in a puddle, which we've all seen a million times. Recipes for photos aren't going to get you anywhere if you want to be original and express your own unique voice, or even find commercial success. So instead of giving you photography recipes, I'm going to break down 3 really common ones, why they don't always work, and then give you an alternative. Then at the end, I'll show you some photos by one of my favorite photographers right now that really show how you can break the rules and still take amazing photos and still end up in the New York Times and Vogue. Let's begin where all photos begin. The light. One really common recipe you'll hear all the time is to always backlight your subject. That doesn't mean putting a light or the sun like right behind them. Cinematic backlighting often just means placing the light source on the opposite side of the subject to the camera. Think of it like the person or the car or the mountain that you're photographing is sandwiched between your camera and the sun or the light. And it took me ages to figure out why this works and why it looks good. And it does look good. There's a reason that so many movies light like this, and it's because it creates depth and shape. Before I understood how this works, I would always just front light everything. I'd walk around with the sun at my back so that everything I wanted to take photos of would be brightly lit. More is better, right? No. But after learning this backlighting recipe and doing it compulsively for a while, I started to notice every time a photo or a movie didn't use it. In fact, some of my favorite shots of all time aren't backlit. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, shot by the legendary Tak Fujimoto, is really high-key and front-lit a lot of the time. And we know that Fujimoto-san knows what he's doing with a light bulb because he also shot Badlands, which is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen, and that is very heavily backlit. So what's going on? How come backlighting isn't a hard and fast rule? While backlighting does add depth and changes how our photos look, it also changes how they feel. While it is important that your photos look good, I think it's much more important that they make you feel the right kind of way. And just like backlighting, you can use front lighting as a creative tool. Getting rid of the shadows can make your subject look bleak or emotionally exposed. Or it could help to keep the tone of an image optimistic and bright. And that explains why front lighting or having a key side camera is so common in comedies. So when we're taking photos, it's really useful to think about how we want them to feel. If you're doing some cheeky juxtaposition style street photography, maybe front lighting is a good idea. If you're doing something a bit more dramatic, maybe not. So instead of following the recipe of always backlighting, instead you should ask yourself, how would I like this lighting to feel? Once you've figured that out, you might think you're all sorted and you're ready to go and take a photo. No, because clearly you're an amateur, weekend warrior, rookie, if you don't use leading lines to draw your viewer's eye to the center of the image. Didn't you know you can use the bridge in front of St. Paul's? I bet you haven't seen that one a million fucking times. Leading lines is a really common recipe that people will often dish out on Instagram Reels. They usually go something like this, and then they take the same photo as everybody else, and then go like this. The thing is, leading lines are useful, but when you use them with all the finesse of a toddler with a machine gun, it often ends up feeling like the photo is supposed to be of the leading lines themselves and not the fucking cathedral. The reason that we like using leading lines is because it lets us drive our viewers' eyeballs to the right part of the image. But there's often better ways to do this without using the photographic equivalent of the kiddie bumpers at bowling alley. So instead of shoehorning leading lines in where often they don't really make any sense and spending your whole day of photography desperately looking for bridges and handrails and lines on the street, I think a much better option is to simply look for shape and structure. Subtlety is key here. You can use things like rooftops or groups of people or even the horizon to create lines that draw the viewer's eye where you want it to go. Here's a photo I like by Dan Wood. There are leading lines here, obviously, but notice how it feels a lot more natural and organic? You can even use the light itself to control where people are looking. Shadows of buildings or trees make really great leading lines without you really having to change your whole composition to include them. There is nothing worse than a great photo being ruined by half of the frame being taken up by a slightly out of focus street just so you could put a line in it. So instead of following the use leading lines recipe, think more like, how can I make sure that the stuff in my photo is helping to support the subject? That doesn't just apply to lines, anything in your photo should be helping to support the subject and tell the story that you want to tell. So it's always a good idea to look around the edges of the frame and pivot around to cut out anything that you don't like. Ugly signs, people's faces, anything attention grabbing that we don't want that doesn't help us tell the story, get rid of it. You might think that one is my favorite recipe to hate on. You haven't seen nothing. Before we get to the worst one, I think a really great way to force yourself to break the rules is to put yourself in a situation where the results are sort of a little bit out of your control anyway. I love to do this by shooting with a slow shutter speed, since you can't really rule of thirds anything if the camera is moving about. But what shutter speed should you use? Lucky for you, I have the answers with the help of today's sponsor, Framer. Framer is an all-in-one website designer, and it makes it so quick and easy to make and publish websites that by this point you really don't have any excuse not to have a portfolio. Okay, you deserve one. Also proof of just how easy it is to get a website out there on the World Wide Web is slowshutterspeeds.com. I used Framer to build a reference guide for using slow shutter speeds to get cool effects. Let me show you. First, I had a little browse through Framer's massive library of templates, and I picked one that was great for showing off photos. Then I customized it a little bit to make it feel a bit more on brand, things like fonts and colors, stuff like that. And then all I had to do was upload my photos, type in what I wanted to say, and it was done. Quick and easy, and now you can use it to look at examples of slow shutter photos with the exact settings that I used. Even if you aren't a professional photographer, having a place outside of social media where you can showcase your art is so important. But aside from being great for people of my skill level, or lack thereof, Framer is also a really powerful tool, so if you are a power user, you won't feel held back. It's got super advanced analytics, you can even run A/B tests on your landing page, and you can use localization to translate your website to share your ideas all over the planet. So after this video, or this weekend after you've been out taking photos, sit down for an afternoon and build yourself a website. That way you can showcase your art the way you want to, not the way Instagram wants you to. So launch your site for free at framer.com, and while you're at it, use the code HunterCreates for an upgrade on the house. Links are below. Thank you very much to Framer and to you for your support. By far the most upsetting recipe I see people giving out is that you should use certain lenses for certain things. Use 85mm lenses for portraits, use 35mm lenses for street photos, and use 24mm lenses for landscapes. No! Don't do that. The reason that I hate this advice so much is that it's so prescriptive that it reduces photography from an art to like a box checking exercise. But 85mm lenses are more flattering because they compress the face. Okay, first of all, not really. The distance is what does the compression, but also, unless you're shooting passport photos, I don't think the goal is always to have people's faces look exactly the same. More than that, I don't think that our goal is always to strive for the most conventionally good-looking photo either. For you, that might be the goal, but for somebody else, they might value a flattering look a lot less than a really interesting one. Remember how we can change the way we're using the light to change the mood and feel of a photo? It's the same with lenses. Just because the Photography for Dummies book says to use 85 for portraits, doesn't mean that every portrait shot on a 28mm looks like poo. When you're deciding what lenses to use, think about the story of the photo you're taking, the feelings that you want to create. Wider angle lenses are great for including more context and putting your subject in a place, or you can get really close to your subject and exaggerate them. If you go for a slightly less extreme, more in the middle look, like 40 or 50mm, that can create a really intimate feeling since your camera is about as far away as a human being would be. Or you can walk one postcode over with a 300mm lens and make your subject feel claustrophobic or isolated. There is no such thing as the right lens to use. Focal length is a creative tool, and there are no flowcharts or checklists or Excel spreadsheets for creativity. If there's one way that you can stand out as a photographer and really create images that capture people's attention and images people love to look at, it's by finding your own unique vision and style, and you aren't going to do that by following other chefs' recipes. Remember how I mentioned at the start of the video that there's a photographer who breaks all of these rules all the time and ties all of this together in a nice bow? That's Sina Nasseri. Sina's work is so unique and distinctive, and it really speaks to me and the style of photography that I like to do. But it's not just me, he's obviously got some other fans because he keeps getting hired by Vogue and the New York Times to shoot for them. I still think I'm the biggest fan though. Cena likes to shoot with flash a lot. Hard, front-facing flash, and that is not cinematic backlighting. But knowing what you're doing with a flash is not easy by any stretch of the imagination, and he definitely understands light and depth. Being able to play with lighting instead of following a checklist means you're able to put more of your own personal spin on the photos you're taking, and I think he's a really good example of that. It also just looks super cool. He also knows his way around lines, and there are sometimes leading lines in his photos, but he uses them in a really natural way where you don't see them there unless you go looking for them. Sometimes he'll even use compositional techniques like leading lines to play tricks on the viewer. Some images are designed so that we look all around it, absorb all of the context and understand what's going on, and then finally at the end, discover the punchline, something unexpected or out of place. I have no idea how he does this so often, and I would be interested in finding out if he's got wizard powers. And finally, lenses. Cena likes to mess around here too. He's a real master of those medium-wide prime lenses like 28, 40, and 50. 28 is not the focal length that most of us would choose to take photos of the richest and famousest people in the world at the Met Gala, which is exactly why his photos are the most memorable and why he keeps getting hired to go and shoot it. The point here is not for you to immediately go get a flash, a 28 and a bad attitude and start shooting like Cena. Then you've gone in a circle and ended up with recipes again. The point is you can be a serial rule breaker and still end up with amazing photos that people love to look at and that can be commercially successful, as long as you're being uniquely you. That means experimenting with your gear. It means shooting stuff you wouldn't usually, stuff you find a bit intimidating maybe. It means, and this is the most important part of the whole video, being okay with failing and messing up and taking photos that suck, that you don't like. That's how you get better at stuff, is by doing it really badly, like a lot. The same advice goes for pretty much every other area of life also, but that's probably out of my wheelhouse. But of course, you're saying, Hunter, of course those photos are cool. He was at the Met Gala. I live somewhere really boring. And? No, sorry, wrong. You've been misled. You can take amazing photos in a boring place, and I'll show you exactly how to do it in this video, which you can watch next. Stay hydrated and create art.